All right, I think we're live. I think everything worked in there. I apparently, thanks to Glenn for pointing out that it looks like we had a daylight savings glitch because it said on the schedule I didn't go live till 1, which I don't think is right. So thank you, Glenn, for noticing that. And I just want to say good afternoon, Josh. It's good to have you here.
Good
And
afternoon to you, I guess.
daylight savings time. Yeah, it is afternoon. It is
Okay.
afternoon. That's absolutely true. So hello, Glenn. Good to see you, buddy. Yeah, it is 100%. It is afternoon. I think everywhere we are anyway, and it is daylight saving time in the U.S. at least, which makes for this fun stretch of time where, well, first of all, it invites the constant stream of articles about we should just adopt standard time. We should just adopt daylight saving time. And oh my God, it's so hard for the fact that my phone changes its clock in the middle of the night somehow. I don't know.
Magic.
But it does mean that when I'm trying to schedule meetings with my colleagues in Europe, everything is an hour closer than it used to be, at least for another week or two. I can't remember when Europe's slot's over, but it's good times. It's good times. So do you like daylight saving time? I always have to remind myself there's no S in there. Or do you prefer standard time, or do you really not care?
I don't care. I just wanted to stop. I don't. I mean, if I have to pick a preference, I would probably pick standard time, just because
Okay.
that's what we call standard.
Okay.
I mean, other than that, I've done this for 28 years. I'm probably this is likely to happen for another 2 years, and it's done with that whole legislation. But apparently, this happened in the 70s. Like,
Yes. There was a period in the 70s before any of us were born that they switched over to permanent daylight saving time in the U.S. and they repealed it, I think, within a couple of years. People forget that at northern latitudes such as mine, I live in Minnesota, we definitely see some pretty major shifts in amount of daylight. And so what people forget is that the sunrise in May, June would be 4 a.m. in parts of Minnesota. And by the flip side, if you adopt daylight savings time permanently, then you run into that scenario where, it's 7 a.m. Your kid's waiting for the bus, and it is pitch black.
Yep.
Because sunrise doesn't happen until 9. So there are some more interesting edge cases there than just I really hate changing my clock once a year or twice a year. Excuse me.
For sure, but then think of all the data inclinations that are resulting from this decision.
Sure.
Because there's, I mean, 1970s. I don't know when it actually happened, so we might need to dial in, because 1970 is the beginning of time. So
I think so, right? At least in the Unix world. So it probably corresponded with that, right? I think
right.
Maybe.
So, like, I'm curious, what are the inclinations that are resulting from us picking an arbitrary year or an arbitrary standard to follow that? Because I've seen at least people on Twitter saying, "Oh, I have this if statement in here to handle the different time zones that we have that we're supporting." It's like,
right?
I can't just imagine that like legitimately happening, just because that is like either so far away from my actual code that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, or I'm just too new to a very old project that's just been around for God knows how long.
Right.
That
right.
I don't understand why those if blocks exist. But yeah, I prefer, so I would, like, if I had to pick, it's standard just because it's standard, but it's also I do live in the normal climates. I mean, Northern Virginia is up there, kind of.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. You see
So
daylight shifts just like me, and not quite as extreme, maybe, but I think that factors into this more than people want to give it credit for.
Yeah.
My opinion.
I'm from Pittsburgh also, so I mean, it's gonna be dark in the morning anyways, regardless, just because of how I've learned by being essentially on the eastern side of the time zone and the western side of the time zone.
Yeah, it makes
there
a
is this distinguishing differences in terms of sunrises.
Yes.
And I'm like, my mind is proposing, do we like start creating more time zones so that way we can have a little bit more say of what time zone or what time the sun rises in our given
Sure.
area. Because that was the whole. I mean, that was kind of the point. It was to put clocks in cycle or in sync with each other with time trains, but it was all based off of what time the sun rises and sunset, right?
Yeah,
So,
well, I think I read something over the weekend that at least on standard time, that means at noon the sun is overhead, whereas on daylight saving time it's not. And
yeah.
I understand the argument that says you want people to sync up their circadian rhythms with daylight. I totally get that. But I think there is more to it than just whether you want your sunlight in the evening or not. Because again, I think about trying to stay asleep at 4:30 in the morning if it is sun pouring into my window, and so then okay, well, we all have to get blackout shades, so I think there's a lot more to it than just I don't like changing my clock. And I will admit, as a developer, when I saw that legislation had passed here in the US, I went through this, oh god, there's going to have to be a lot of coding changes for this. It isn't going to be clean and easy, and I worry about the ripple out effects of that, because there are many. I've had a lot of those wonderful time issues with tests and things like that.
But then you just mocked time into your test, and you're perfectly fine.
So I years and years ago, I built this application for part of our company and handed it over to them. And then on a couple months later, my director comes over and says, "Hey, you worked on that app, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Hey, could you give them a hand? Their build broke this morning and they're not sure why." I said, "Well, they should just look at their last commit that probably broke the build, and they should, like, well, that's the thing. They haven't actually changed the code base in a couple of days." Well, that's interesting. So I looked at their CI instance, and sure enough, one of the tests had failed. And so I looked at the test and I realized, oh, this test is going to fail every 7 years. It's just, there's some weird time issue with every 7 years. This happens on and I'm like, okay. And I honestly don't remember if I just put a note in there that said, yeah, this is going to fail again every 7 years, or if I change the test. I honestly don't remember. But time, how does it work?
Like now, the thing that's going through my mind is like, what happens every 7 years? I don't know what happens every 7 years.
I don't remember, to be honest with you, but there was some weird edge case that crops up periodically, and I may be misconstruing the 7 year thing. I mean, I know there's something in how we do checks, whether you're paid twice a month or every other week. There is another weird edge case there where every n number of years you have an extra pay period in a calendar year because of the way the every 2 weeks things falls. And there's all these weird edge cases, and so that was my immediate thought as soon as I saw this legislation had passed. Now, to pass the Senate, it's still got to get through the House, still has to be signed into law here in the US. And then I think it would still take a couple years for them to implement it. But in the back of my head, I'm thinking, oh, that's going to cause some serious problems with some code, man. There's just no getting around it.
There's going to be a lot of system updates in the next, I don't know, over the next year. Yeah, because they're probably just going to be feature toggles for all this stuff to be put in place. And if it doesn't work out, they just rip off the code. Or they're already taken care of, or they just flip the feature toggle and they're good and they're set. They don't have to worry about that ever again.
Right.
In theory.
Maybe that's the answer. Toggle. That's the answer. We just have to have some code in there that says, do we observe this DST thing or not?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll be fine. We'll just do it live. Right.
Exactly.
It'll all work itself out in the end. Oh, good times. Well, we'll touch more on that, I'm sure. But hello. Let's see. Deaf lines. There we go. I always love trying to pronounce people's user IDs. It's always an enjoyable thing for us as humans. So good morning, good afternoon.
I say hello or reply to the message, and hopefully they recognize that I'm replying to them.
Exactly. I don't. Happy Monday. That's a bold statement, Cotton. It's a bold strategy. We can get into some debates about whether or not this is good or bad here on this whole Monday thing. But at least it gives me an excuse to hang out with you. So hello. It's good to see you.
I mean, I have a bit of a case on the Mondays, but that's
all right. That's all right. That's interesting. It decided not to show our display names for some reason, Josh. That's interesting. I must have flipped the setting or something, but
we're doing it live, so
sorry, we're doing it live.
Just an FYI for everyone. I asked Nate to go ahead and switch out some of the infographics, just because I'm me and I want to be different.
Yep. We're trying bubbles today, so everything's got rounded corners, because as we all know, the epitome of good UI design is rounded corners.
Right. That's why Google has done it for God knows how long.
Well, we like to go back and forth though in UI design, don't we? You know, for a while it's this, and then we go back. It's just like fashion. You know,
Yeah, I mean, it's all nothing but fashion.
Right.
Because why would we go from a flat design to paper design to back to flat design, or vice versa? It's just all over the place in terms of UX patterns and people's preference. And if you don't think that preference doesn't change over time, that's going to bite you in the butt.
Glenn says rounded corners and no bullet points. I mean, I'm 1,000% with you on the no bullet points, Glenn. I'm if you've ever seen any of my slide decks, you know that I am very much against bullet points. Bullet points are evil. Bullet points hurt people. Stay away from bullet points. So,
even the name bullet points in themselves,
right? Yeah, it has a bad connotation to it, to say the least. I was corresponding with Neil Busing this morning on Twitter, and he posted something about his Kafka presentation and how he's got 50 slides and he's really gonna have to start editing. And so my reply was, 50 slides, what is this, a lightning talk? You know, so that was...
Oh wait, you guys, you're part of No Fletcher Stuff, so you know what happens there. Where Here It Is does NGConf, we have like 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting... Oh, we got another comment. Let me throw that in there. Hello. Oh, I like this one. Chocolate Satio. Chocolate.
I'm not attempting it. I'm just
going to go with chocolate. I'm going to say hello. Thanks for hanging out with us. I appreciate that. You know, if you've got questions for us, you know, please throw them into the chat. I'll do my best to get at them. So it's funny because I cut my teeth doing 90-minute presentations and having 4 to 8 presentations in a 2-day window. That to me was just normal.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I started speaking at other conferences where it's like, oh no, this is 60 minutes or 45 minutes or 20 minutes. And you do one talk, you know, and it was a little bit of an adjustment to say the least, but yeah, I mean, it's all what you get used to, and you know, it's fun.
I mean, our good friend Mike Cordici has always been poking me and prodding me to do a talk at NGConf. I was like, or not NGConf, sorry, No Fluff Stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I barely have a stand-up gig, for 15 minutes, let alone 90-minute presentation. So I don't think that's going to be good for me for at least a little bit. We'll see in the next like couple years as I build my repertoire of.
I think you could do it. It is a bit of a challenge. Although, you know, ironically enough, I'm very much of the opinion that, oh, there we go. I just had to get rid of our banner and then our names come back. I didn't realize banners and our names were mutually exclusive. There you go. I learned something new every day, Josh. I honestly think the shorter the presentation, the harder it is and the more work it is to get the presentation to fit, because you have to be more exacting. It's a lot harder to do a 1 minute, a 5 minute, a 10 minute than it is to do, frankly, even like a half day, full day kind of workshop, because you've got room to breathe. You can experiment, try things out. So I don't know. I mean, obviously there's a lot of work that goes into building a workshop. I don't mean to diminish that in any way, shape, or form, having done them, but the 10-minute talk is usually a lot more prep work for me than trying to do a 90-minute talk.
Oh, I'm just taking it as like, I know how my tweets are structured. I know how my Facebook messages are structured. I know how my LinkedIn messages are structured. So that's kind of the formula I'm following in my mind. Sure. It's like, I think I can swing out like a 20-minute talk, because most of my life is already on Twitter. So I can probably parse it out, like how to get to the essence of a story in order to get and move forward from there. It's my biggest problem has always just been figuring out those filler words and those filler stuff. Especially that's why, like, for at least in my mindset, is like 90 minutes seems like too long for any talk.
Yeah, I mean, it's a trade-off, because you have more room so you can go deeper. It also gives you more time for questions. You don't feel quite so rushed, but you do have to have material in your back pocket in case you don't get questions, or you know, maybe you go a little quick through one section. But you know, it is all what you get used to say the least.
For sure.
And it occurs to me we're 15 minutes in, and I haven't even given you a chance to introduce yourself, and I do apologize for that, Josh. So why don't you give us your origin story? How'd you end up in this weird technology space? You know, if you want to explain your room art too, I'm down for that. I love the rubber ducky. That makes me so happy.
Well, that's actually there in a specific position because we are doing a podcast. So, like, I switch out these banners based on whichever is whatever I'm doing, especially on my
Gotcha.
live streams. One of these actually represents what I'm doing. So instead of asking me
Awesome.
what's going on, you can take a look at
You can
what's going on
tell.
behind me.
That's
Though it's
very
also
cool.
for anybody that's a viewer of my Twitch will I will never acknowledge it. It's one of those hidden things that you have to realize of what's going on.
It's an
But
Easter
hey,
egg.
everyone, I'm Josh Van Allen or JVA or that developer that causes problems. Normally, that's usually how I introduce myself. I normally goes with JVA just because there's usually a lot of Joshes in the organization.
Sure.
So, so there's I just find nicknames and JVA says saying Josh Van Allen is a little bit easier to say. It's the same amount of syllables. Um,
Yeah.
Actually, Allen. Yeah, no, it's all three. Three. So, so it all works out that way. It also like removes the whole Bond villain name associated with my name. I've been expecting you, Mr. Bond.
Well, hello, Abhishek. Thanks for joining us. If you have questions or comments, please throw them at us here as we go along.
But so I'm originally from Pittsburgh. I'm from Pittsburgh, PA. Born and raised.
So
Only the left.
are you a Steelers fan then as part of that?
No,
No. Okay.
sadly, I'm not a football fan in
Okay.
general.
All right.
And for our international viewers, American football, not soccer.
Right.
I'm more of a hockey fan. So the Penguins.
Oh, okay.
Which is funny because I previously worked for Capital One, who the owner or the CEO of Capital One is also, I think, one of the owners of the Capitals.
Gotcha.
And Capital One owns the Capital One Arena in DC where
Checks
they play.
out.
So you would figure that I would not want to go work for a company that works with the Capitals at all, but it all worked out somehow. Oh no.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
We lose you,
no.
Josh?
My
See,
webcam just died.
this is how you know we're doing it live, because although I at least have your picture, so we at least have
Yeah.
that. All right, we'll work through it. It's all good. You know, this is the joy of recording live in front of a studio audience as opposed to, you know,
There we go.
there we go. It's all good.
Yeah, so
USB,
I'm using
how does it
a
work?
face cam, Elgato face
Okay.
cam. I'm a big fan of Elgato for all my streaming stuff. So Elgato, if you're out there, I know this is a.
If you want to sponsor us, we're happy to take some gear.
Particularly me. I mean, I'm not. VMware already has enough dollars. But it's an Elgato face cam. It's been going on and off every so often, like after
Okay.
a good 20 minutes or something like that. It's a known bug that I've seen, or at least a
Interesting.
known bug with me with my setup.
Sure.
So I gotta every so often refresh it. And that's just reset. It looks like from Streamlabs or StreamYard's perspective, it's just setting the quality from 1080 to 720, put it back to 1080, and it works just
Sure.
fine.
Technology.
Anyway.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. There's been more than one occasion where I've gone into any of these various streaming platforms and it just won't see my camera. It'll see my FaceTime camera, but it won't, you know, so it'll see the one on my laptop. It won't see my external camera. And I'll have to basically unplug and plug it back in. And it's like, that is one of those aspects of software that I find both somewhat reassuring and also scary at the same moment. It's the, well, did you try rebooting it? Yeah, and it worked. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's because there's a part of me that's like, I really want to know why.
Right.
And there's another part of me that's like, hey, it works. Just move on. But,
well,
but then it's like, wait, what could possibly go wrong here? A lot.
Well, it makes you wonder, like, it's device hardware stuff, and it makes you wonder, like, how does airplanes work?
Oh yeah, yeah.
How do they ensure quality and continued connectivity and working from that perspective? But I
I
digress.
mean, I've been on more than one aircraft where they've essentially said, "Sorry, folks, we're a little delayed here. We have to reboot the navigation computer." And I'm like, "Well, that's really reassuring. Thank you for that."
Well, the
Yeah.
navigation computer isn't as important as, you know, your jets or your engines.
I mean, they probably know where they're going, and
Yeah.
I'm sure they can get radio things that say, "Turn to this heading and now fly this way for 28 minutes, and then turn to this heading." So I'm sure it can all work itself out. But I will admit, on multiple occasions, I've seen the entertainment system reboot itself, and up comes clearly the Linux boot
Mhm.
kernel and everything. I'm just like, "All right, cool." It's Linux on the desktop. It's right around the corner.
No more watching Marvel for that trip.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is always half the battle of, okay, are we actually we get to watch a movie on this trip, or are we out of luck?
Exactly. Um, but so I'm from Pittsburgh. I've been in the healthcare industry, or I started off in the healthcare industry. Did that through my as an intern, and then a year or so full time employee. I got in because I knew connections, and especially as a college student, I was able to get in just fine. And that really started off my. I got to be essentially the person that just did stuff that other engineers just didn't want to do, and that
Sure,
turned into my whole mantra of I feel like I'm the House or the Sherlock Holmes of software development, where I'm doing things that and investigating things that people aren't just looking into or just
sure,
doesn't want to do. And I'm looking for those very, very hard problems. Then from there, it went into environmental health and safety company. Um, did a lot. It made me realize of how disconnect potentially my mantra and my mindset is different from like construction workers and people that
sure,
work on a assembly line or other things. Is definitely there are people out there that just still view software as tools versus as
hmm,
consumer goods.
sure,
Um, and it takes a while for people to realize what's how to actually use that tool or how do I incorporate that tool into my life so that way I can do my job
right,
proficiently.
sure.
Um,
Well,
it,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to keep on going, but if you want to
Well,
ask a question
so we got a question from Chocolate Satio. I guess I'm gonna go with that,
there.
asking for our thoughts around like solution design code reviews, from an architectural perspective. And so I guess I'd start with your thoughts on that, Josh. What do you think about when it comes to doing a code review or helping developers with a solution problem? And obviously I could chime in too, but what are your thoughts? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, it definitely is because code reviews, in my belief, is usually too late in in the process. I'm definitely in the mantra of pair programming from the
Yep,
standpoint and using that as your form of code review,
sure,
and that's why like so this actually leads into like another area. So I was actually one of the I want to say leading reviewers or provers for Capital One's largest repository. It dealt with the post login application. So if you have a credit card, I'm sorry, but I was one of the leading provers for that organization just because or of that repository because of my Angular background. Just
sure.
running Angular, that's not anything hidden that I could be publicly shared. But the problem that I usually see that comes from an async code review process is understanding why they took this approach in terms of implementation, because from my perspective, at least when we were building that organization or building that approval process, oh no, it's gonna keep on happening, and I'm gonna keep on fixing it.
No
Um,
worries, man.
but as
We
we're
just need a
going,
shell script for that. Like we'll get
I
you a
should
button.
eventually. I'll put it in my stream deck so that way it's all done
Right.
automatically.
Press the button. Boom.
Exactly. But while we're building that organization or building that process, at least my mindset has always just been that just seems too far away. Like, what are we
Sure.
reviewing at that point? for the most part, we're reviewing just standards and make sure that are people following our standards and are they following the best Angular practices. But doesn't get into the process of did they implement it in the way that the business would want them to implement? Did they actually meet the definition of done according to their side of the business? And that's definitely tough if you're doing an async process because and you're contributing to a multiple organization repository because we're not going to always have the context of your implementation. So we have to rely on the business to provide that purview or that view and make sure that they are legitimately good. So code reviewing is probably not it's great. However, I would try to find a way in order to incorporate that into your normal development practices because you're going to be asking those people anyways of how to get stuff done. But then when we're talking about like solution design, I mean that's really just talking. Parts of me that's talking to business to understand do you actually have a full grasp of your organizational structure and do you know who to potentially reach out to? Because most of the time I'm just reaching out to people to say, hey, have we done this previously?
Right.
And is it worth to just go ahead and move forward with that? But then it's also just understanding of what you know to be true and what to know to be false, and just working off from that. Because for the most part, we're just making stuff up as we go. I'm breaking the realm of architecting and solutioning because I am titled as an architect, but I don't view myself as any more important or any more bestowant of the title than another engineer. It just so happens that I have probably deeper understanding of, in my particular case, the Angular ecosystem and the Angular community than just an Angular engineer or an Angular person that's been dealing with Angular. So for the most part, it's just been building the if you know what to be true and what to be false, you have something to go off of, regardless of how small that truth and false is, or the truth factor and this false factor is. And then from there, it's just figuring out who potentially is your appropriate connections from that point forward. Because there's been multiple times I've just been relying on getting more distilled information from other locations and other people to help build out a design.
Yeah, so Chuck and Seisho agrees with you here on that, and I'll second that notion. There's this great Rich Hickey quote that talks about the fact that most of the problems in software are problems of misconception.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no type system, there's no amount of testing that you can possibly do that is going to get you around the fact that we didn't understand what the business needed here. Or we misconstrued that these two terms sound similar, but they're really very different. And it's important for us to understand that difference. And, I think that's where because we're always seemingly in such a hurry, we got to go. And the developers are just sitting there. So it doesn't matter if we have requirements, just start building stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, is there any other industry where we would do that? Would you ever sit there on a construction site and say, hey, we got some carpenters here today, so just start nailing some boards together and we'll fix it in post. It wouldn't happen
in the construction site.
Right. It just wouldn't happen. And I think that to me is part of our immaturity as an industry, that we don't look at that, and we get so fixated on just go instead of, do we know where we're going?
Mm-hmm.
Do we know what we're trying to build?
Yeah, and that makes you wonder, is the Agile manifesto makes the most sense versus the waterfall approach? And I mean, everyone in the modern age would say, yeah, the Agile is the most most methodical way in order to start building software. Is how you're supposed to be doing things, right? That's what everyone is doing, right? And then you realize, oh, we're just turning wheels to turn wheels,
right?
And we're just keeping people busy until we get the appropriate requirements.
Right. Yeah. Too often that's the case. We have the developers, let's just have them do something, anything, because that's somehow better than not. We forget about the fact that most of that work is going to get thrown away. So what did we gain here? And I mean, if we were experimenting, we were doing a proof of concept, we were learning more about something, then we've at least gained some piece out of that. But otherwise, not so much. No. Oh wait. Oh, Broco Dev. Dare I say water
Rocco.
fail? Oh, Rocco.
Yeah,
Dev.
he's from here, Dev, as well.
Awesome. So there you go. Water fail. I like that. I'm going to steal that one, Brocco. Thank you. That's going into my repertoire. This is
I know they call it scrum fall, but that's just me.
So Josh, I was on a project once where a success outcome from the project was successfully piloting agile fall. Yeah, that was interesting. So Abhishek asks a great question. What factors do you consider when designing a solution? And it's funny you bring that up, because I literally just had a conversation with Layla last week where she and I were walking through something she's building, and she's like, should I do this? Should I do that? And we went through all those kind of trade-offs. And so apparently we should have just live streamed that, but I'll let you give your thoughts, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah. So especially when it comes to, like, I mean, it depends on, like, what are we solutioning, obviously.
Right.
Everything.
Yeah, it depends. Okay, right. Moving on.
But like, let's say we're building, like, say that we're upgrading an application from AngularJS to Angular or something. That is a solution that we're trying to, or we were trying to get off of an older legacy system to get to a modern system. And the solution is to do that was the solution. Ultimately, like, in order to determine which framework or which system is better, there's a lot of factors associated to that, like developer experience perspective, not just developer experience just for people that's familiar with the framework, but just developer experience with, like, do they have CLI? Are they easy to onboard? Are they easy to integrate? Can you get around some of those things? But then when you're talking about, like, the actual application in work, you start thinking of, like, performance perspectives. So is it fast to build? Because in that way you have, again, from a developer perspective, closing that feedback loop in order to get test results, as well as getting developer feedback. And then you have machines and actually to produce that stuff. But then you start thinking of, like, actual work runtime environment, and then you start thinking of what type of database are we doing? What type of data structures are we dealing with? What type of system are we trying to build? Do we really care about one set of population versus another set of population? Do we care about it to be structured and unstructured? Do we care from a database perspective? Do we want network calls to be highly performant, or is it okay for it to be laggy a bit, just because only one person out every month is going to be interfacing with this application versus 75 million customers are going to be interfacing with this application? There's just a lot of my mindset, especially now when I'm fitting my role as like a solid software architect, has been more towards the developer experience and the developer ecosystem. Because I think for the most part, like, if you're on AWS, if you're on Google Cloud, if you're on Azure, those solutions are just, for the most part, just pipe and filter. You're just putting pipes together and you're filtering out the data, and you're pretty much moving forward from there. I don't think there's really proper solutioning happening anymore, and I'll fight people for that. But I think for the most part, we're just reliant on vendor products and vendor solutions in order to just build our own solution.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, and I agree that the long answer short of Ashik, of course, is it depends. But I think that the thing I think about a lot is vector of change. What is likely to change? What direction is it likely to change? Where do I want things to be easier to change, harder, potentially harder to change as a trade-off there, and understanding how is this going to be used in the future. And so that's kind of what Layla and I were working through is she had a third-party service that she was building to sort of give you one bit of data. And she's like, man, how do I want to store this in my other system? Do I want to have a link and have to call back out to it? And of course, well, it depends. Do you want to have to call that service every time you recreate an order? And do you care if something changes in the future? and so it's all about what is likely to change. How are you likely to use this? And again, it's just walking through those trade-offs. And there is no best way to do any of this. And I think that's part of what's so frustrating is we all wish there was this algorithmic way of saying this is the best solution. This is the best architecture. There isn't. There's least worst, but that's about as good as we can get for now.
Yeah. And that's why like especially when like designing solutions, it's usually dictated by your company, and your general practices than it is to like think of the best way. It's the best way of with your company constraints.
Right.
Like,
well, and that gets to Chocolate Seychelles' point here. In my company, no one cares about design patterns. They only care about the release date. Is the way I'm interpreting that. And I think we've all been there where it's like, I got to have a date. Why? Because I got to have a date. We got to release on this date. Why? Because reasons.
I've been on multiple death marches, and those are horrible. Those are the most miserable projects that you ever want to work on. And yeah, you get it done eventually.
Right.
But this is why I don't think like that's really part of the solution, though. That's more in a sense of your engagement with the business and your engagement of the organization holistically from that perspective. And I think, and this is something I've been trying to bring to software engineers in general, and kind of led me down the path of sidecar. I've been a magician for 20 years. Been a hobbyist magician for 20 years. I want to say I'm Michael Carducci level for people that know Michael Carducci. He is a really, really great magician.
What did Carducci do with my wallet? God.
He is an amazing person. If you have an opportunity to ever see a show from him or get to go to one of his talks, please do so. But he and I have the agreement that we think that the most important thing a software engineer can do is be a storyteller than being a Heartset engineer.
Yeah.
Because for the most part, it doesn't matter what you build. It just matters, can you sell the story associated to that? Because if you can't sell the story associated to it, why no business will give you the go ahead to do that story or to go to do that project. And that helps sets like deadlines and other things. So that way you have the appropriate dates aligned. And if you need to extend that date for whatever reason, you can start harping on that. Because for the most part, like I've been talking to people. I just recently left Capital One, so one of the things that they were asking me is like, how do I get tech ideas or tech resources to do tech things, and instead of business objectives. And the thing is, like, you got to be able to equate that tech idea to dollars, because that's how your business representatives, your business views it. If you can't represent in dollars, then you kind of are stuck from that perspective.
Like we have to put it in terms they understand. It has to resonate with them, and often money is the universal resonator.
Yeah, because even if you talk about like security risk can easily be equated to dollar amounts, because that's all lawsuits. And lawsuits are easy to probably equate to, because you could just take a look through the history. We know that accessibility is a big deal, because from the standpoint of Domino's getting sued by an accessibility group for $5 million or something like that.
Right.
So we know accessibility and 508 compliancy is very, very important. For people that don't know, 508 compliancy is the compliance of the ADA or the Accessibility
American Disabilities Act, I believe.
Yeah, that tells what
Scott Davis will be able to break that down for us. But yeah, 508 ADA. I think I'm thankful that finally applies more broadly, because I think anybody who looks at the web and thinks that you shouldn't make that easily accessible, you're living in a different universe as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. When you the only way people to get jobs today is to get through websites.
Right.
That's kind of like, you can't go to your mom and pop shop. Well, you probably still can, but like go to your mom and pop shops and say, hey, can I get a job? More than likely they're gonna ask you to fill out a form online and get your resume through there, if you have a resume at 16 years old.
If you don't think this matters as a developer, I challenge you to go to a website and go through it with a screen reader and get back to me on that. having done that, and this was a long time ago, we retrofitted an existing app to be 508 compliant, and it is a lot of work. But when you listen to a page through a screen reader, and then you retrofit it to do it in a more meaningful way, wow, it really makes a huge difference. And you realize just the level of impediments you're putting in the way of someone. So I think, and it ends up being a better design for everyone. I mean, that's the part of this that blows me away. Is it isn't just for people who have a vision impairment. It makes it better for all of us. And I just, to me, that's why this shouldn't even be a question. Is it wrong for me, Bronco, that I want to call you Bronco? Maybe it's because the trade of Russell Wilson to the Broncos now has the Broncos on my mind here, but I will die on the hill that that user XP is more important than developer XP. I mean, you and I talked about this in the pre-show. I'm a longtime front end person, and so I have sort of built into my brain is design of everyday things. I remember the first time it's on the shelf behind me. I actually have 2 copies of it. One was signed by Don Norman. Best book ever. Every developer should read that, and you will never look at a doorway the same again. It's important that we think about the user experience part of this, without a doubt.
But is it more important?
Well, but see, now I would argue developer experience is also an experience as a user experience. I think about that with APIs. I think about that with languages, frameworks. There is a lot of design thought that goes into how do I make this usable for a developer. It's just a different kind of user interface if you want to look at it that way.
So really you would tweak that statement to say all user experiences are important.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a huge part of this, is understanding that a user interface isn't just a set of forms and controls.
Yes.
An API design is a user interface, and so we need, I think, have a broader view of what we mean by user interface.
Yeah, because you can go through tons of API documentations and realize how horrible they're horribly written for like a front end framework to consume.
It's so Abhishek agrees. It depends. So I'm glad it's a universal statement. I told my grad students that on day 1 last fall. The answer to everything I ask you this semester is going to be it depends, and they glommed onto that immediately. But I think it's this almost lack of empathy that some people have, and well, maybe it's not that. I think sometimes it's because we're rushing. We're trying to go so fast, and it is hard to name things. Every time you've come up with a method name, you're like, I mean, some are really obvious, some are really easy, and others you're like, get time at local. Yeah, good enough. Let's move on.
Yeah, I mean, what is it? What is the old saying joke? Developers has 2 problems: naming things and off by 1 errors. Or 3 problems, and this is off.
Right.
I botched that joke.
It's fine. No, but I mean, the sentiment is correct. Naming things and trying to come up with lists. Yeah, the off by 1 joke. Yeah. I definitely had that n-1 problem. There's no getting around it. But do you want to shift gears and talk about user interface since we seem to be kind of drawn into that? I know you and I were discussing that kind of in the beginning, and I don't know if we want to start with the battle cry of front end engineering versus back end engineering. Where does the real work happen? Or
yeah, let's do that. Let's see how many viewers we can lose today.
Let the battle begin. 2 developers go in, only 1 comes out. I don't know.
And I think I would think that so this is actually coming in from a nomenclature of I think when people just talk about front end engineers, they're talking about client engineers. They're talking about browser clients. Some people may not include native mobile clients as front end engineers, but by the definition that we usually follow with front end engineers, they should be wrapped into the same code base or the same nomenclatures. So if you're viewing it from that perspective, how different is the front engineers versus back end engineers? Because they're just dealing with a limited amount of resources, because my phone isn't as powerful as Amazon's Lambda servers.
Right.
I'm single-threaded because JavaScript is single-threaded for the most part, unless you go onto a web worker, I believe. Web worker allows you to go off of the main thread, but for the most part, you're on the
Well,
single
with
thread.
exceptions, right? You can't. I don't. There are still some exceptions, even within what you can do with web work, as
Yeah,
my memory vaguely pulls up.
but for the most part, like we're dealing with mostly single-threaded.
Yeah.
Um, even like on native mobile devices, it's Paint is done on the main thread. So
Yeah.
if you're talking about iOS or Android applications, it's Win and Swift or Java. Which, by the way, hey, they're also server languages, or well, Java is at least written on a mobile device. So like if the nomenclature is they're just not writing data structures for backend databases that have to deal with networking calls, like we deal with networking all the time.
Right.
Uh, that's just as important from our perspective. Our perspective. I've already taken the title as front engineers, front end engineers than back end engineers. For the most part, at least in my perspective, back end engineers are just resource engineers, more so with database. And I don't want to say resources in terms of like database structures and making those APIs available from that perspective. Maybe process engineers,
Sure.
than just being the title of backend engineers. Especially like even today, and I think even Netflix back when the Netflix microservice uh, manifest came out. The 2012 document even says there was a back end for the front end architecture pattern.
Right.
Even that still suggested that front end engineers per se still had some server work to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So like, and there's also a build pipeline that we have to manage. So like I'm always just trying to figure out, it's like, why do we have this dividing factor from a backend engineer versus a front end engineer? I don't know why we still have that today.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a largely artificial distinction, and I think it's reminiscent of sort of the era of software where we were very fixated on layer by
Mhm.
technical piece, and I especially as we blur the lines between, you look at JavaScript, there was a huge chunk of time in web development where your front end was HTML and JavaScript and your back end was
Mhm.
C, C++, Java, something else. And
Mhm.
then you can write JavaScript on both ends. We've been doing that now for more than a decade, really.
Yep,
And
Java on
so,
both sides.
yeah, and so it's really blurs the lines. And I think that's part of it. And, we can have a debate about full stack developer too, but I don't think, I feel like with these more distributed architectures, we're moving away from technical partitioning
Mhm.
and more towards unit of work partitioning, domain partitioning, whatever, however you want to phrase it. I think Mark calls that sort of service based, as opposed to getting, down in the weeds of that layer cake architecture that we
Yeah.
used historically.
Yeah, that's why I think that's probably where like the idea of client-based development, client-side development is ringing in my brain, just from the standpoint of that perspective, versus like resource engineer or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see what
Um,
Abhishek's got a good question for us here. Designs an incremental process. We might not encounter pain points unless we start implementing it. Can we share? Yeah, so that's a fantastic point. We sometimes do get wrapped around the axle of sort of that upfront aspect of this, and to me, this was part of what we discussed earlier around like agile and things of that nature. Getting those nested feedback loops of, well, let's try this. Let's do an experiment and see what we think. And then should we do more of that? Should we do less of that? Should we go in a different direction? And so you're absolutely correct that there are some things we don't realize are going to be problematic until we start doing it.
right.
We only hypothetically think this is going to be an issue. So yeah, sometimes we do have to get 2 weeks into it before we realize this wasn't a good idea. And that's why we need to have that ability to adjust and adapt.
I mean, isn't it always be refactoring? I mean,
God, I hope so. Right.
if you're not refactoring at least
You're
every
not
other
doing it
day.
right. But that's part of the challenge for us too, is understanding, and this is why I brought up earlier that I try to think in terms of change vectors, like where
Mhm.
might this change? Where do I want this to change? And knowing that it is some trade-offs, that there's only so much I can do. And I think where we sometimes also get into trouble is we get so worried about painting ourselves into a corner that we end up building a level of flexibility that we will never possibly need. It's a really hard line to walk. And I think that's part of the value of experience, part of why I'm of the belief that architecture is pretty darn important, that you need to have some senior technical thinkers, call them whatever you want, but some folks who've been there, done that, and have some of that experience to know, oh, yeah, I know that sounds like a good idea. It really isn't. And I, been there, done that, got the t-shirt.
Is that going to be like are we going to do like a badge of honor or a repertoire list of how many times you've been slapped?
Well, but I mean, I do think that's part of it. I mean, there's
Yeah.
that joke. I just saw Ken just mention this in his Java Heads newsletter, or Jarheads, excuse me. I misconstrued his name. Um, Most developers don't have 10 years of experience. They have 1 year of experience 10 times. And to me, that's that real key characteristic of when you are, again, architect, senior, whatever, tech thought person, whatever title role you want to use, that I don't really think is important. You have to have been on a project long enough to have experienced the consequences of your decisions. That to me is the key piece of this equation. And to know that, this is going to be a problem it's not, you can't see it right now, but I guarantee you this is going to be a problem in 6 months.
Yeah, because like it's a lot different when you have to deal with an application that currently only serves like maybe 10 people versus 100 people versus 1,000 people versus up to 1 million people. There's like those type of increments, I'm not joking, are probably like the legitimate increments that you should probably think of like when you're talking about solutioning.
Right.
Because those are a whole different beast from that perspective.
Well, and it's also understanding my application is never going to have 100 million concurrent users. So I do not need that to be my key number one most important thing.
Sure.
Versus this application will have this other interesting constraint that I do need to focus on. And that's where I think it's so important that you don't have just a set of recipes that you follow in every single project. It depends. I mean, Abhishek mentioned that earlier. Like, it depends. Yeah, it all depends. You have to think. You have to use your own experience. And you can't just fall into this trap of, well, the last time we did it, and we've always done it that way. I mean, that phrase drives me up a wall when I hear that.
I hate the phrase of, we've done it before, so we're going to keep on doing it that way. Right. You want to be asking me to solution something differently if you already went with that solution.
Right. That's all, we've always done it. My favorite example of that, Josh, I was working on this Java project back in the early aughts, and I basically just copied the change log from the COBOL side and added that in on the Java side, even though we had this thing called Subversion. And so we had version control, and we had, and it took me a long time to realize that's a really dumb thing to have at the top of every file. We don't need that. It's not helpful. But we've always done it that way, Josh.
I mean, I will say, especially as a person that is involved with the community, having that changelog is actually pretty helpful because you can go by version.
Fair point.
I mean, granted, like, there's probably like a change every couple of days or something like that that's getting pushed out.
Right.
But a version comes every week, or at least a patch version comes every week. So we could just see synopsis of all the changes that happened during that time. So yeah, that probably makes sense. But like in your internal company, probably doesn't make any sense. Like, again, that's a thing to discuss, to consider. Who's the audience? Who's the audience of this document? If it's going to be internally, you can probably take a look at the code history. If you're a contributor to an open source repository that's getting, I don't know, a quite significant amount of downloads or whatever,
that's why we have change logs.
Change log, yeah.
I apologize, Glenn. I should have had a trigger warning or something. That yes, I did bring up that word, and yes.
So purpose is better.
Yeah, should we, or clear case? What other tools do we want to pick on as long as we're at it? CVS. No. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So I think we've definitely pushed Glenn too far.
Okay.
That's fair.
So Git. Okay.
Okay. Well, you know what's worse. I will tell you what's worse, Glenn, and I'm sure I've shared this story with you before. I had a friend of mine ping me one day and said, you know, he was having a problem and could I help him? Sure, no problem. And I said, just send me a link to your repo. And he said, my repo. I said, yeah, you know, your Subversion repo. Send me a link. I'll take a look at your code. He said, oh, we're not in Subversion. I said, really? Are you guys still in ClearCase? He said, no, we're not in ClearCase either. I'm like, well, what tool are you using? I thought that's all we had here. And he said, oh no, I have the code out on the LAN and periodically I duplicate the folder and we just email each other files. I'm like, okay, I think I know what your problem is.
Flash drives, you know.
Yeah, it's all good. What could possibly go wrong? And besides, that's how we've always done it. So I think we're definitely dating ourselves when we tell these kind of stories because
I mean, definitely the flash drive one. That I have in my professional career, I have never dealt with a flash drive experience for version control. Maybe for like college project, but that's about it.
Sure. I see flash drives makes me think of, I saw a tweet over the weekend that was basically if you're at a conference and someone gives you a flash drive, like that's not a good gift, not a good piece of swag, because no one should ever be plugging a random flash drive into anything they care about. Floppies with tape. Okay. All right. I guess that's I definitely am old enough to say that my all-time favorite conference badge is a 3.5-inch floppy with a label that was your name on it. It was the best conference badge I've ever had, and it's actually somewhere behind me on my wonderful bookshelf here. Yes, ClearCase was its own band of joy. Let's just say, you know, there's a reason why we don't use ClearCase anymore. Let's just put it at that.
We VMware, and here it is. Yes, there's probably still an organization out there in the world.
Someone somewhere is using it, I'm sure, and I feel sorry for those developers.
I actually do have a question for you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
How do you feel about replacing legacy software from modern tech because of recruiting effort or stuff like that?
So basically, what do you do if the framework, the tooling we're using is so old, we have a really hard time recruiting?
But nothing's broke.
This is an interesting question because I was at an organization where we had this debate between Java versus C#. We were in the middle. I should just say .NET more generically. And we were being acquired. We had written a whole bunch of stuff in Java. They'd written a whole bunch of stuff in .NET. And so it became this battle of, well, which one are we going to use moving forward? And it took about 18 months of back and forth and around. And amazingly enough, apparently the decision went to the CEO, which, okay, that should never be the CEO's decision. Yes. But it should be very obvious that if things are working and this is not a burning platform, as in there are still developers that know it and support it, and it's still getting updates and security patches, there's not a lot of justification to rewriting it because it's so expensive. You are undoubtedly going to add in new bugs. You're going to reintroduce bugs that you've already fixed. There's a lot of pain, a lot of risk that goes into doing that rewrite. Now, if you've got a burning platform and it's like, oh my gosh, no one is doing this anymore. There are 7 people in the country that do this and they're billing out at multiples of thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. We can't afford it. But again, it's all about the cost and the trade-off. And So you have to ask yourself, what do we want to do moving forward? Do we continue to invest in this product? Do we create a new product? Do we start migrating this product? You know, and that's often, I think about this with COBOL. Mm-hmm. Trillions of dollars of commerce is flowing through a COBOL system right now as we speak.
Yes. Most definitely.
What do we do with all that? And this is a really, really hard problem because rewriting it will not be cheap. Mm-hmm. You cannot, I mean, I've joked that I will happily write COBOL code, but the number I'm going to slide across the table is not my current salary. I'll give you a number after I talk to my financial advisor and say, I want to retire in 2 years or less. And I'd really, really like to live on an island when I'm done. And he'll give me a number and I'll slide that across the table. And if that's what you want to pay me, then I will happily write COBOL code for you for the next 18 months. But it is risky because of all those edge cases. So much of software is, oh yeah, we ran into this weird thing that happens when daylight saving time happens to fall on this day instead of that day. And, but it's only this country and not that country. It's like, wow, this is really, really challenging. So it's hard. And it does get into that whole, it depends thing as well. But if you literally cannot hire anyone to do this, that is part of the cost of continuing with that system. And so you should be able to put together, even if it's kind of a swaggy thing.
Yeah.
This is the cost of trying to maintain this in the status quo, because the status quo isn't free.
Yes.
People think the status quo is somehow free. It's not.
So dollars being lost in terms of maintenance.
Right, exactly. And that's a number we can get our heads wrapped around.
Yeah.
And if it is, we've had this position open for a year and we've literally gotten nobody that can do it, it's a big challenge. And so Chocolate Seisho said he's ready to quit because of their case. Totally can agree to that. And yeah, Abhishek, you're absolutely right. There are the great irony to me is a lot of the organizations that invested in technology in the earliest days, insurance companies, banks, financial institutions, they're the ones that have this big chunk of heritage code.
Yes.
This tech debt. So what do you do with it? And then there are no easy answers. I wish there was. I wish I could frankly wave a magic wand over your code and now poof, it's all modern and updated, but that's just not how it works.
I wish I could speak that from a Capital One position, but I can't.
No, I totally understand.
Because there is a lot of stuff that Capital One has posted online because they're working on that migration from the couple last year or something like that. They closed down their last physical data center that had COBOL. So they're off of COBOL entirely, off of the processing. So it may be less than $1 trillion or trillions of dollars because Capital One isn't processing those anymore. But I wish I could speak more.
No, I don't want to get you in trouble, man. We're not here to get anybody fired.
There is definitely
or have lawyers call you up. Put it that way. That's all we need.
Work for them anymore. But
I know, but their lawyers will find you. You know that.
True, but yeah, I mean, like their point you got to find those companies. You got to find those companies that are willing that has been changed. And at least from my perspective, there are some banks out there that are changing, but the question is, rapidly is a relative term.
Yes. And in fairness, I don't want my bank to be changing stuff at a super rapid clip and break it. You can't move fast and break stuff as a bank.
Yes.
Because then when people log in and go, wait, that's not the right balance, what just happened? You're going to have there's a cost to that too.
Yes.
If somebody can't see their latest photo that they posted to social media, well, that's probably not the end of the world. But if your 401k balance just vanished,
that's kind of a big deal.
It's kind of a big deal. People care about that, So that's part of what I think is so fascinating about this industry is getting people to see those trade-offs and part of our challenge is being able to communicate those trade-offs.
Yes.
It's easy for you and I and our viewers to be talking about, oh, this code needs to be more maintainable. Sure. But that doesn't mean anything to our customers.
Yeah, exactly.
What do they care?
Remember how I was talking about the whole Storyteller type thing?
Callback.
The developers needs to be
callback.
There's that. Yeah. That needs to be a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the challenge of this whole thing is getting people to understand that you can't just speak tech. You've got to be able to phrase this in a way that your customers get it too. So,
yeah.
Well, I know there was at least a couple other things you and I talked about in the pre-show that I wanted to get across.
Did we finally settle the debate about back and front end?
No, I don't think that's possible. I really don't. Although Layla did this presentation, my colleague Layla, this was last week, the week before, and she actually shared this video beforehand. It was part of the lead into her keynote, and it took the opposite stance, which was, I did all this work on the back end, and it's like, yeah, but did you see all the really cool stuff that so and so did on the front end? And yeah, but I've been working for like the last 3 weeks to get this back end problem fixed. Yeah, but did you see it's got rounded corners now? And so. I joked with her. I said, "That's funny. I've always seen it
round the corners."
See, we did that just for you. Now, you and I were talking about this in the pre-show about
giving
people right access to the production database. What could possibly go wrong?
I see nothing could be wrong. Have you seen the human species? We've done everything perfectly fine.
Never fat finger a command once.
Uh,
Always works perfectly the first time.
well, I think this was really like us talking about like just general microservices and practices that we've heard of, and I think this like I'm slowly figuring out the whole theme throughout the entire through this entire talk, which is developer experience, user experiences from the different perspectives,
Right.
and somehow back end versus front end development somehow matches into that entirely. Um, yeah, it's like I, I worked on a previous organization that had database access that gave out to clients. We were a white labeling product company. Um, I just saw Brocco's message saying, "Do database still exist?" Yes, surprisingly. Maybe not the way that you remember them to be,
There's
but
a lot more
basically,
of them now. It
yeah.
isn't just IMS and DB2. There's all sorts of different databases.
And it isn't just Firebase or Amplify storage or any of that type of stuff. It's there's like Oracle and SQL Server and other things, and those we gave previous access to our clients directly to the database for whatever reason.
Sure.
I guess for a very high premium because
I would
you
hope.
would hope if they screw up, it's going to be painful for us to recover.
Yeah.
So rank up that dollar as much as you can from that perspective. But that ties back into like, are we just getting better from a design like from experience perspective or a developer experience perspective that we're giving API access that does the things that they want to do and making it easy for them to build out APIs. So is or easier from our side of the house for them to do their pipe and filter work from that point
Sure.
forward. Um, I don't know, like it's also I think it's more consumable. Though I'm biased because I consume everything through an API.
Well, and I think sometimes this is yet another example of, but that's how we've always done it. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't remember the specifics. I've clearly blocked that out in my brain, but I was at least associated with a project where the customers had not only read access but write access to the production data. And I mean, as soon as I heard that, I'm like, well, you're kidding, right? And they're like, no, they do. And I'm like, but why? Well, because reasons. And I was never given a reason that was any better than because they wanted it. And so, well, how often do they, screw something up? It's like, well, pretty much all the time. It's like, then we should probably take that away from them, don't you think? I mean, if you wouldn't give your toddler a chainsaw just because the toddler wanted a chainsaw, so we need to think long and hard about why we would want them to get in there and mess around. So yeah, here's the access. I dare you to try it. That's not a bad way of phrasing it. All right, here you go. And to be fair, if they're going to experience the consequences of their mistakes, I'm cool with it. But I know in that instance,
They're gonna
anytime
just
they
call
screw
us up.
something up, it became our problem.
Yep.
And that's the part that really bothered me.
You know that whole department that's just sitting around doing nothing or
Right,
dealing with it?
right. We clean up on aisle 3.
Exactly.
That was our job. Yeah, it's good times. It's good times. But yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe that's why the back end engineers get so excited about, or why they think it's more important than quote unquote front end engineering, because clean up on aisle 3.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I do think like one of the things that uh, backend engineers or traditional backend engineers get hyped up about is they're the backbone for innovation.
Sure.
Like things like Web3 and and um,
Josh, are
um
you announcing your own cryptocurrency today? Are we going to launch a crypto?
yes.
Let's get a
So
let's get a
there's
coin
going to
out
be a
there. Come on, buddy.
cryptocurrency after this talk that's going to be
Rubber
released.
ducky coin.
JVA says I own 1% and it's worth $2 billion.
Exactly.
No,
Coming soon.
but I mean, like people are troping the data modeling and the discoverability and the I don't know the analytics and AI work that people are doing today, and they're driving that from strictly an API perspective. And that's probably like why like large companies view that as the Heartset and view and prefer backend engineers than just strictly front, like the traditional sense of front end engineers. And that's why there's probably still that stigma between the two, because
Sure.
like front engineers, all they can do is client work.
Right.
That's the trope that we hear.
Right.
But no.
And it's so easy because it's just moving some pixels around, and
yeah, you're just doing this,
some
that.
color, and it's this shade of blue and rounded corners. Who can ever forget rounded corners?
Yeah. How have you tried to be performant on a single threaded mobile device? that is atrocious. That is annoying to do. Have you seen the modern web? We have build systems. We have just as many build systems as backend engineers today.
But NPM is its own special brand of what are we doing now? Because what was this? Somebody just changed an underlying NPM library, so it'll just delete things on your hard drive and overwrite things on your hard drive, and it gets pulled in by at least one major front end technology. I think Vue pulls it in without affixing a specific version to it. So what could possibly go wrong?
I mean, not to say that doesn't happen with Gradle packages. I mean,
of course,
happen with Maven. Like,
of course,
like this is just this. I mean,
or Docker images.
Sure, yeah.
10+ million instances of Java that had a flaw in it were downloaded without anybody realizing it till after the fact. So it's probably fine.
By the way, chat, this is us like bashing as front engineers and backend engineers. This is it.
It's a all access bash fest at this point, right?
But for the most part, this is I think the biggest thing is, especially like the trajectory that I see from my side of the world, that backend engineers being more focused on is making data available from, I guess, a Web3 standpoint, but I don't know what that means because Web3 itself has been coined for crypto, but
sure,
it doesn't really correlate to an actual Web3 persona.
Right.
It also, like, are we talking about more of JSON LD type personas where the devices that are listening to us in our houses able to pick up more information so that way they can categorize data a little bit better for everyone, so that we're talking about more AI models than we are talking about just anything else. And I think that's usually why that trope is getting that type, or that persona is getting that type of trope, or that type of perspective, because AI is a new thing, and
it's branding.
Yeah, it's a very, very good marketing effort when you say, hey, we have a AI driven model, we have an AI driven thing.
Callaway sells golf clubs based on the fact that they use AI to generate the pattern that it's not on the visible side of the club, it's behind the club.
Exactly.
Back in your face, got ripples on it that are designed by AI. So
it knows when you're going to hit the ball, so that way it moves the ripples on it, so that way you can get the appropriate.
Kind of. I mean, it's all about giving you the highest core. I think a coefficient of restitution, I believe, is the physics.
You're just throwing out words out that I'm like.
I mean, I'm probably mispronouncing at least one of
them. But like, I guess that's the reason, so that way we don't just have static data or static structures. But I don't think it just drives as much value to a business than say a website.
Sure.
Or a feature that provides that.
Yeah, we get into a lot of those battles of, we got to brand it a certain way, and it just sounds cool to say, we use crypto this and blockchain that and AI modeling and ML, and then everybody thinks it's innovation. That's what it's all about. So
it's how you get your investor dollars, whatever is necessary in order to keep the project alive, I guess.
Absolutely. So I've got to ask about Rubber Ducky.
Yeah.
Because I had this experience last week. I was working on something. I couldn't get it to do. It was not working. I kept staring at it. I'm like, I know this works. And so I pinged Jonathan Johnson, friend of the show. And I said, I don't know what's going on. I sent him the code and he said, let's hop on a Zoom. And literally, as soon as I started explaining it to him, I took another look at it and went, oh, that needs to be not equal instead of equal,
Mhm.
and felt like an idiot. But part of it was Jonathan's amazing, intellect, and his presence was enough to get me to see the right thing. But rubber ducky is a powerful tool, is it not?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I honestly talked to Brocco, or at least Brocco specifically, quite a few times, and like I start to send him a message on Slack, and I'm like, "Oh, that's how I solve it."
Yep. Yep.
But then he's also like my rubber ducky, or I'm his rubber ducky. So like our ducky is mutually beneficial. uh, when he goes on his live streams and does his things.
Yep.
So I mean, like I think the biggest problem for the most part is like we get so far in our heads, and as soon as we try to
Yeah.
explain to someone else, it's like, all right, how much detail do I have to get back to for them to understand the problem I'm having? And oh wait, there's that problem. There's the reason why I couldn't figure that out because I've
Yep.
that fine-tuned detail that you need to get back to. Because we're very smart people. At least I like to think that I am.
That's fair.
We're very, very smart people, or at least that's the title I like to persona myself as, so that way I'm just as smart as everyone else. But that we always get think is like we understand 100%. We're already down so far deep, or we've already sunk so much time into it that we're not. There's no reason for us to go up to air, and then you realize, oh, there it is, right there. Oh, how about that? So totally big fan. That's why I said at the very beginning of the story, yes, of this podcast, that the background of the artwork that's on the back of my webcam.
Your background image.
There we go. Thank you. Words are hard.
Oh, it is. It is. It's the hardest.
Represents the stuff that like I'm passionate about. Obviously,
Right.
rocking, podcasting, that kind of fits the persona. And then
Coffee fits in there. Oh man, I'm all about the coffee.
And then obviously, because we're on Twitch, or at least I'm on Twitch.
We're on Twitch and
YouTube. Well, yeah. I have to do some gaming because why not? Because that's a dear passion of mine. So yeah, these arts represents the things, the things that I like to do. So from that perspective, it's just there's that. But yeah, big fan of Rubber Ducky, just from the standpoint of you forget what you don't know, or you forget what you did know, and those fine-tuned details that are necessary to probably explain to somebody the problem is where you find out, oh, there's that solution, and immediately connect back to what you done.
Explaining it, even if it is to the rubber duck, will expose the assumption that you were making, and then you go, oh, that's right. That's exactly what happened when I started explaining it to Jonathan. Literally, as I'm saying the words out loud, I take another look at the same thing and go, right, I need to invert that.
The problem is, for me, I need to be to a natural person.
Okay.
Because to me, I think the rubber ducky is just as smart as I am. Or just as deep as I am. He's my fair programmer, not a person that's outside the process.
Sure.
So yeah, for me to go to explain something, or to usually find out a problem, I have to go back up in order to explain what's going on.
Okay.
So, but if you're able to solve it while you're still in the trenches, good on you.
It doesn't hurt to try, is all I'm saying. Like if you don't have somebody, if you can't get a hold of somebody on Slack, you don't, especially in this, I think we're going to be in this remote world for the foreseeable future. It's nice sometimes to have that external thing you can talk. You can talk to your cat too, or your dog. It doesn't have to be an inanimate object. I have I guess it'd be an astromech. I have an R2D2 like robot sitting right behind my monitor here. That's another thing that I often talk to. So, it's whatever works best for you.
Well, now this doesn't make me think I need to build a product with AI and machine learning.
Oh yeah, no, I like where this is. Glenn has a great comment here. Monolith action figure. So I'm with it. I'm with it. And speaking of Glenn, not to completely change subject, but I know we've been rambling for a while here, and I know you have real work to do today.
What?
I have to say, I love doing this, but we're going to be in the real world here in April, which is hard for me to get my head wrapped around. I still don't entirely know how to feel about that, but I have hotel booked. I'm going to book flights probably this week. First Spring One tour in person since pre-pandemic. It was going to be in Chicago, April 26th and 27th. So if you're in around near Chicago and you want to see, do I have legs? Does Layla have legs? What about Whitney? Josh, Glenn. I think Glenn's going to be there. I think, if memory serves. I know Spencer's going to be there. We're going to have the whole fam is going to be back together in the real world. I'm so excited. Oh, Glenn's not going to be there. Boo, hiss. All right, that makes me sad. Well, I know Glenn will have to be at some future one of these, but I'm very excited that we're going to be back on the road here in about a month. So if you really want to come hang out with us, let me rephrase that. Please come hang out with us. We miss you all. I love doing virtual stuff, but boy, do I miss being live in front of a real studio audience instead of just a fake one. And yeah, I agree completely, or I shouldn't say fake, a virtual audience. So yes, I agree with Glenn. It will be fun. I'm sure we will have some. I think you're going to like what we're trying to do this year. Let me just put it that way. We have some very good ideas. So I'm very excited for that. So please come join us next month. And I think we've got at least a half a dozen stops planned. So
Nice.
if you're not near Chicago, that's fine. We're probably coming someplace near you. And if you need us to be somewhere, hey, let us know, and we'll see if we can get the sales guys to agree we should go there. So
you guys are going to be anywhere near McLean / Northern Virginia?
I know we're doing New York. That's the only other one I can think of off the top of my head. See, was I smart enough to actually put a copy of? I was not. I think I grabbed a screenshot, but I did not. I didn't actually capture. But and I can find this relatively quickly here on the interwebs. So Chicago, Toronto, New York, Seattle, Atlanta, and Amsterdam are at least the tentative cities at this point. And I know there's a few others that are being floated. So if we didn't mention your city and you really want us to come, please yell and holler at us. So, So Glenn says New York and Atlanta on the East Coast. So,
Gotcha.
so that's where we'll be coming your way here in this calendar year. So it occurred to me today that I don't even remember how any of this travel stuff works. I did it so frequently. I mean, one year I think I had 410 hours in airplanes.
Wow.
I know it was kind of a crazy year. And I was looking at my calendar and I'm like, how come my trip's not on there? And then I had that panic moment of, did I not book? I booked hotel, and then I had to go back into Concur, and basically just looking at it somehow made it talk to trip it, and then it showed up. I don't know.
Travel sites are weird.
They can be. I definitely had a moment of panic there that I did not, in fact, book what I knew I had booked. So, boy, it's good times. So I'm excited for that. I really am. I genuinely am. I mean, it is going to be a little strange getting back on airplanes, but I do think it's going to be very welcome. So please come join us in person. Anything else you want to touch on, Josh, before we declare victory and call it a day?
Declare victory that the front end engineers are just as important.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's the only trope that I want to make sure that we win on.
All engineers are important engineers. Doesn't matter what part of the code base you're messing around with, in my opinion.
As long as you code, and as long as you don't break stuff. Well, break
Absolutely.
stuff.
Well, I mean, you can break things as long as you fix it, right? Just leave the code better than when you found it. So
exactly. No, I don't have any other topics.
Okay.
Just be sure to read if you guys are interested of me speaking or me just rambling on my ideas. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter.
Absolutely.
At JVA says. And then my Twitch is just JVA, literally just JVA.
There you go. Well, Josh, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I really appreciate it. I'm off next week, but the week after, I'll have Caitlin Mahoney who's going to be hanging out with me. She helps organize a bunch of user groups, so I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. She and I had a fascinating DM exchange after I think it was when I was speaking at AJUG I want to say, was that last month, Glenn? I don't know. Time has no meaning in a pandemic, near as I can tell. But she and I had an interesting back channel conversation. So I'm interested to see what we can come up with. And yes, okay, Glenn agrees. I'm on the same path. So I'm excited about that. So I'm off next week, but then we'll do that. And it's going to get a little interesting after that, schedule wise, because of course we're going to be on the road. So I'm still not entirely sure how that's going to work with any kind of streaming. So we'll have to see. The hotel Wi-Fi scenario is definitely pretty bad. So I don't know if this is going to work or not. I'll have to mind meld with Layla and get her opinions, because she is the expert on all this. So we'll see what Layla says. But in the meantime, Josh, thank you so much, man. This has been a blast. And
No
we didn't I didn't even mention Ted Lasso. I don't know how I got through an entire episode without saying Ted Lasso. So there's my
Is that just a thing?
It's a requirement for me to say Ted Lasso. I can't. My kid's been asking me when season 3 coming out. I'm like, dude, they're filming it right now, but it takes time, man. It takes time. Can't rush art.
No, you can't.
Rush art. All right. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Appreciate all the comments. We will see you in a couple of weeks, and then onward and upward from there.
See you, everyone.